Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Endeavour, watching the stars slowly drift past the main view screen. 3 days had passed since they entered the Kepler 442 system, and the routine survey mission was turning out to be exactly that, routine. The fourth planet showed signs of ancient water activity, but nothing that would change the course of human exploration. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Parker walked up to him with her daily report. She was the ship's xenobiologist, though she had never actually studied any aliens. Humanity had been alone in space for the 23 years since they achieved faster-than-light travel. Every world they found was either dead or had simple life forms that barely counted as interesting. "Nothing new on the surface scans, Captain," Lisa said, handing him a data pad. "Same mineral compositions we've seen on dozens of other worlds. The atmosphere is too thin for complex life." Jake nodded and looked out at the planet's single moon. It was a gray, cratered rock that looked like every other dead moon humanity had catalogued. Chief Engineer Ryan Davis was running power efficiency tests on the ship's systems, making sure everything worked properly for the long journey home. That was when Communications Officer Amy Collins spoke up from her station. "Captain, I'm picking up something odd from the moon." Jake turned toward her console. "Define odd, Collins." Amy frowned at her instruments. "It's an energy signature, sir. Very faint, but it's definitely artificial. The pattern is too regular to be natural." Lisa immediately moved to the science station next to Amy's console. "Can you isolate the frequency?" "Working. On it," Amy replied, her fingers dancing across the control panel. "It's not like anything in our databases. The signal seems to be coming from beneath the surface." Jake felt his pulse quicken. After years of finding empty worlds, the possibility of discovering actual alien technology sent excitement through his entire body. "How deep beneath the surface?" "Approximately 2 kilometers down, sir. The signal is weak, but consistent. It repeats every 47 seconds. Ryan Davis looked up from his engineering station. "Could be some kind of automated beacon, maybe a distress signal." Jake considered their options. Standard protocol required them to report any artificial signals to Earth Defense Command before investigating, but that would mean a 6-month delay while they waited for instructions. By the time a proper research team arrived, the signal might be gone. "Collins, can you decode any part of that signal?" Amy worked for several minutes, running the signal through every translation protocol in their computer systems. Most of it came back as meaningless noise, but occasionally patterns emerged that looked almost like language. "I'm getting fragments, Captain. The computer thinks some of these patterns might be words, but I can't tell what they mean." "Wait. Here's something clearer." The speakers crackled with static, then a series of tones that almost sounded musical. Between the tones, Amy's computer had identified what appeared to be actual words in an unknown language. "The translation software is making guesses based on mathematical patterns," Amy explained. "It thinks this section might be saying something, like help or aid or maybe assistance. And this part here could be dying or ending or gone." Lisa looked at the data streaming across her screen. "Captain, if this really is a distress signal, we might be looking at the first evidence of intelligent alien life. We have to investigate." Jake knew she was right, but he also knew the risks. Landing on an unknown world with potentially hostile aliens went against every safety protocol in the book. On the other hand, they might be looking at the most important discovery in human history. "Davis, how long would it take to prepare a shuttle for surface reconnaissance?" Ryan checked his systems. "About 3 hours to run full diagnostics and load the necessary equipment. We'd want environmental suits, communication gear, and basic defensive weapons. Collins, keep monitoring that signal. Let me know if anything changes. Parker, I want you to prepare a full scientific survey package. We're going down there." The next few hours passed quickly as the crew prepared for what might be first contact with an alien species. Jake selected a small team for the landing mission: himself, Lisa, Ryan, and 2 security officers. It was a risk to leave the ship with such a small crew, but they couldn't afford to send too many people into an unknown situation. The shuttle descended through the thin atmosphere toward the coordinates Amy had identified. The moon's surface was even more desolate up close, nothing but gray rock and ancient impact craters. But as they approached the signal source, their instruments detected something unexpected. "Captain," Lisa said, studying her readings, "I'm detecting a large, hollow space beneath the surface. It's enormous, possibly several kilometers across." The shuttle landed near a series of small openings in the rocky surface. Jake and his team put on their environmental suits and carried portable equipment toward what looked like a natural cave entrance. But as they got closer, it became clear that the opening had been artificially widened. The tunnel sloped downward into darkness. Their lights revealed smooth walls that showed clear signs of tool marks. Someone or something had carved this passage out of solid rock. After walking for nearly an hour, they emerged into a vast underground chamber. Jake's breath caught in his throat as their lights revealed the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. The chamber was filled with structures that looked like they were made of living crystal. Tall spires reached up toward the ceiling, glowing with soft blue and green light. Everything seemed to pulse gently, as if the entire cavern was breathing. And then they saw the aliens. They were unlike anything humans had imagined. Each being stood about as tall as a human, but their bodies were composed of the same crystalline material as their buildings. They moved with fluid grace, their forms shifting and changing color as they walked. When they noticed the humans, they stopped and gathered together, clearly as surprised by the encounter as Jake's team. One of the beings stepped forward. When it spoke, the words came out as musical tones, but somehow Jake could understand the meaning directly in his mind. "We did not expect anyone to answer our calls," the being said. "We are the Velnari. We have been alone for so very long." Lisa activated her recording equipment as Jake stepped forward. "We are humans from the planet Earth. We received your signal and came to investigate." The Velnari's form brightened with what seemed like hope. "You came to help, but you do not know us. Why would you risk yourselves for strangers?" Jake looked around at the beautiful crystal city and the dozen Velnari who had gathered to watch them. "Because someone was calling for help, and we heard you." The lead Velnari, who identified itself as Azeth, began to tell them a story that would change everything Jake thought he knew about the galaxy. The Velnari had once been a proud civilization with millions of their kind spread across many worlds. But they had been hunted, killed, and driven from planet to planet by something called the Hegemony Coalition. "We are the last," Azeth explained. 10,000 of us hiding in places like this across the galaxy. The Hegemony will not stop until we are all dead. They fear what we can do." Lisa asked what made the Velnari so dangerous that an entire coalition of alien species wanted them extinct. Azeth's form shimmered as it concentrated. Suddenly, Jake could see the cavern from multiple angles at once, as if he was standing in several places simultaneously. The sensation lasted only a moment before Azeth released the connection. "We exist in quantum states," Azeth explained. "We can be in many places at once, see through the barriers between dimensions. This makes us valuable for traveling between stars, but the Hegemony believes we are too dangerous to live." Jake felt anger building in his chest. Here was a peaceful, beautiful species being systematically murdered simply because they were different. It reminded him of the worst chapters in human history when people were killed for their race, religion, or beliefs. Ryan was scanning the Velnari technology with his instruments. "Captain, their quantum abilities could revolutionize space travel for everyone. No wonder someone wants to control or eliminate them." As Jake listened to more of Azeth's story, he realized they had stumbled into something much bigger than a simple first contact situation. They had discovered an ongoing genocide, and humanity now faced a choice that would define their place in the galaxy: The question was whether Earth would have the courage to stand up for what was right, even against impossible odds. Admiral Susan Blake sat at her desk in Earth Defense Command, reading Captain Morrison's report for the third time. The words seemed impossible, but the evidence was right there in front of her. Humanity had found intelligent alien life, and those aliens were being hunted to extinction by a powerful coalition of 12 different species. The implications were staggering. Just 6 months ago, the Hegemony Coalition had sent ambassadors to Earth, offering humanity membership in their interstellar community. They had presented themselves as peaceful traders and explorers, the guardians of galactic civilization. Now it turned out they were running a systematic campaign of genocide. Susan activated her secure communication system and called an emergency meeting of the Global Defense Council. Within hours, representatives from every major nation on Earth gathered in the underground conference room beneath Geneva. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Senator Peter Collins from the North American Federation spoke first. He was a thin man with gray hair and the kind of political instincts that had kept him in power for 20 years. We need to be very careful here. We're talking about interfering in the affairs of species that have been traveling between stars since before humans discovered fire. President Elizabeth Warren leaned forward in her chair. She had been elected on a platform of human rights and international cooperation, but this situation was beyond anything in her experience. Senator Collins, we're not talking about interfering in their affairs. We're talking about whether we stand by and watch genocide happen. Dr. Kevin Wright, the cultural anthropologist who had been studying the data from Captain Morrison's mission, stood up to address the council. He had spent the last week analyzing every piece of information about Velnari society that the crew had gathered. The Velnari are completely peaceful, Dr. Wright explained. They have no weapons of war, no military forces, no concept of organized violence. Their entire civilization is built around harmony and exploration. They're being slaughtered simply because they exist. General Marcus Steele, the recently appointed head of the Human Space Marine Corps, studied the tactical reports on his datapad. The numbers were not encouraging. The Hegemony Coalition has over 3,000 ships spread across their territory. We have 47 vessels that could be considered combat-ready, and most of those are converted cargo haulers with defensive weapons. The Chinese representative, Minister Li Wei, shook his head. The mathematics are clear. We cannot win a military confrontation with the hegemony. If we oppose them, they will destroy us just as easily as they are destroying the Velnari. But President Warren was thinking about more than just military math. She had grown up hearing stories about her grandfather, who fought against fascism in World War II. He always told her that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. General Steele, she said, what do our intelligence estimates say about hegemony intentions toward humanity? Steele consulted his reports. According to the Velnari, the hegemony follows a pattern. They identify species with useful abilities, then either absorb them as junior members or eliminate them as threats. Humanity's rapid technological development and aggressive expansion has already marked us as a potential problem. Dr. Wright added another crucial piece of information. The Velnari believe that humanity's offer of membership was a test. If we prove ourselves useful and compliant, we might be allowed to survive as servants. If we show independence or moral backbone, we'll eventually be marked for extinction like they were. The debate continued for hours. Some representatives argued for accepting hegemony membership and hoping for the best. Others wanted to remain neutral and avoid taking sides in galactic politics. But a growing number were beginning to see the situation the way President Warren did. Senator Collins tried one more time to convince the council to avoid involvement. Even if we wanted to help the Velnari, what could we realistically do? We can't fight the hegemony, and we can't hide 10,000 aliens on Earth without them noticing. That was when Captain Morrison's voice came through the communication system from his ship. He had been listening to the debate and felt compelled to speak. With respect, Senator, I've been with the Velnari for the past week. I've seen their children, watched them teach each other, listen to their stories about worlds they'll never see again. These aren't abstract political problems. These are people who are going to die if nobody helps them. Lieutenant Brandon Hayes, a young Marine who had volunteered to return to Velnari space with medical supplies, added his voice to the conversation. My grandfather fought Nazis because they were murdering innocent people. My father fought terrorists. For the same reason. This isn't any different just because it's happening in space. President Warren looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders. She could see the fear in their eyes, but she could also see something else. Humanity had always been at its best when facing impossible odds in defense of what was right. The hegemony's next cleansing operation is scheduled for 6 months from now, she said. They plan to eliminate the remaining Velnari refugees once and for all. We have that long to decide what kind of species we want to be. Dr. Wright pulled up holographic displays showing Velnari art, music, and philosophy. They're not just asking us to save their lives, they're asking us to save their entire civilization. Everything they've learned, created, and built over thousands of years will be lost forever if we do nothing. General Steele stood up and walked to the tactical display showing known hegemony fleet positions. If we're going to do this, we need to understand what we're facing. The coalition has overwhelming numerical superiority, but they've never faced organized resistance before. Every species they've encountered either joined them willingly or was too weak to fight back. Minister Li Wei frowned at the implications. You're suggesting that our inexperience might actually be an advantage? I'm suggesting that humans have a history of doing impossible things when we're fighting for something we believe in, Steele replied. The hegemony has never faced a species that would rather die than surrender their principles. Captain Morrison's voice came through the speakers again. The Velnari have offered to share their quantum consciousness technology with us. With their help, our ships could navigate hyperspace more accurately than any hegemony vessel. It won't make up for the numerical difference, but it might give us an edge. President Warren stood up and looked each representative in the eye. We all know what's at stake here. If we help the Velnari, we'll be starting a war we can't win through conventional means. If we don't help them, we'll be complicit in genocide. And we'll prove to the hegemony that humanity can be intimidated into submission. The vote was closer than anyone expected. Several nations abstained, and others voted against intervention. But when the final count was tallied, 57% of Earth's governments had voted to offer protection to the Velnari people, regardless of the consequences. Senator Collins shook his head as the results were announced. You're all insane! We're going to get every human in the galaxy killed for the sake of 10,000 aliens most of us can't even pronounce the name of. But Lieutenant Hayes had a different perspective. Senator, my unit's motto is, "Who dares wins." Sometimes you have to dare to do the right thing, even when everyone tells you it's impossible. President Warren authorized Admiral Blake to begin immediate preparations for humanity's first interstellar military operation. Earth's shipyards would work around the clock to prepare their small fleet for what everyone knew would be a desperate fight against overwhelming odds. Dr. Wright would lead a team of scientists to study Velnari technology and culture, hoping to find ways to integrate their abilities with human military tactics. General Steele would coordinate with Marine units across Earth to prepare ground forces for combat in alien environments. As the meeting broke up, President Warren remained behind with Admiral Blake and General Steele. The three of them looked at the star charts showing hegemony territory and the locations of known Velnari refugee sites. You realize we're probably about to start a war that will end with Earth being destroyed, Admiral Blake said quietly. President Warren nodded. I know, but if we don't fight, we'll lose our souls. And if we're going to die anyway when the hegemony decides we're inconvenient, I'd rather die standing up for what's right. General Steele smiled grimly. Ma'am, I've studied every major war in human history. We've never won by being the strongest. We've won by being too stubborn to quit and too crazy to know when we're beaten. 3 days later, President Warren stood before the cameras to address not just Earth, but the galaxy. Her words would be transmitted to every hegemony world, every oppressed species, and every refugee hiding in the dark corners of space. Today, humanity draws a line in the stars, she began. We reject the hegemony's offer of membership, and we formally extend protection to the Velnari people. To those who would commit genocide in the name of order, we say this: not on our watch. Some things are worth fighting for, and the right of every species to exist is one of them. The message was clear. Earth had chosen sides in a galactic war, and there would be no turning back. The hegemony's response to President Warren's declaration arrived within 72 hours. Ambassador Nicole Thompson sat in the diplomatic receiving chamber at Luna Station, watching 12 different alien species appear on the holographic communication system. Their message was delivered by High Castellan Vorth of the Crethans, a reptilian species that served as the Coalition's military arm. Vorth's scaled face showed no emotion as he spoke. The human species has made a grave error in judgment. You have 7 solar cycles to withdraw your protection of the terrorist organization known as the Velnari, or you will discover why no species opposes the hegemony coalition. Ambassador Thompson had been chosen for this assignment because of her experience in hostile negotiations. She had spent years dealing with dictators and war criminals, but this was her first conversation with aliens who casually discussed genocide as policy. High Castellan, she replied calmly, humanity does not negotiate with those who commit systematic murder. The Velnari are not terrorists. They are refugees fleeing from your extermination campaigns. The Krathan leader's eyes narrowed. The Velnari possess abilities that threaten galactic stability. Their quantum consciousness allows them to exist outside normal space-time, making them impossible to control or predict. They must be eliminated for the safety of all civilized species. Thompson felt her anger rising but kept her voice steady. You mean they must be eliminated because they can't be enslaved? You mammals understand nothing of galactic politics, Vorth hissed. Your species has existed for barely a moment compared to the civilizations represented in this coalition. We have maintained peace and order for over 2,000 years through strength and unity. Your version of peace requires the extinction of anyone who doesn't submit to your authority, Thompson shot back. That's not peace, that's tyranny. The communication ended with Vorth's promise that humanity would learn the cost of defying the hegemony. Thompson immediately transmitted the recording to Earth Defense Command, where Admiral Blake and General Steele were coordinating the most ambitious military operation in human history. Captain Morrison had been promoted to Admiral and placed in command of the hastily assembled Earth Defense Fleet. His flagship was the UES Defiance, a converted colony ship that had been retrofitted with the most advanced weapons humanity could build. The rest of the fleet consisted of destroyers, frigates, and converted cargo vessels that had been armed with whatever defensive systems the shipyards could install. The numbers were sobering. Humanity could field 47 ships, ranging from the massive Defiance down to small patrol boats that had been pressed into service. Intelligence estimates suggested the hegemony would send at least 800 vessels to deal with the human threat, including massive siege platforms designed to destroy entire worlds. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, studying tactical displays with his senior officers. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell commanded the Marine contingent, while Chief Engineer Ryan Davis worked to integrate Velnari quantum technology with human ship systems. How many Velnari refugees are we protecting? Morrison asked. Dr. Lisa Parker, now serving as Director of Interspecies Relations, consulted her reports. We've identified 43 refugee sites across 7 star systems. Total population is approximately 9,800 survivors. Many of them are children who have never seen their original homeworlds. The weight of responsibility was enormous. Humanity was risking everything to protect fewer than 10,000 aliens that most humans had never seen. But every member of the crew understood what was at stake. If they failed, the Velnari would be extinct within months. Ryan Davis had been working with Velnari quantum scientists to adapt their technology for human use. The breakthrough came when crystalline singer Venth, one of the Velnari elders, offered to create a permanent quantum link with human navigators. The connection will allow your ships to move through hyperspace with perfect precision, Venth explained through a translation device. You will be able to appear exactly where you intend, rather than approximating coordinates like other species. The process was risky. Human minds weren't designed to handle quantum consciousness, and the first few volunteers suffered severe headaches and disorientation. But gradually, a small group of navigators learned to work with the Velnari connection, giving Earth's fleet an unprecedented tactical advantage. Lieutenant Nancy Price was the first human to successfully maintain a stable quantum link during actual hyperspace navigation. The experience was unlike anything in human understanding. She could perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously, see the connections between distant points in space, and guide the ship through routes that would be impossible for conventional navigation systems. "It's like seeing the universe from inside and outside at the same time," she explained to Morrison. "I can feel where we need to go before I consciously know the coordinates." Military strategists on Earth were working frantically to develop tactics that might give humanity a chance against overwhelming odds. Colonel Frank Morrison, Jake's brother and a career military officer, had studied every successful underdog victory in human history, looking for patterns that might apply to space combat. "The key is to avoid fighting their kind of war," Frank explained during a strategy session. "They expect us to meet them in formation and trade shots until the stronger force wins. Instead, we need to use hit-and-run tactics, quantum jumping, to attack targets they can't defend and making them pay a price for every system they try to take." General Steele was training volunteers from across Earth's military forces for what everyone knew would be desperate fighting. Marine Sergeant Tony Rodriguez had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment, leading boarding parties against hegemony vessels. The plan was to use quantum navigation to get Marines inside enemy ships, where human close-quarters combat training might give them an advantage. "The aliens have better technology and more ships," Rodriguez told his men during training. "But they've never fought humans before. They don't know that we don't quit, we don't surrender, and we get more dangerous the more cornered we become." The cultural exchange between humans and Velnari had produced unexpected benefits. Army medic Captain Rachel Green discovered that Velnari healing crystals could accelerate human tissue repair, potentially saving lives during combat. Communications specialist Sergeant Danny Clark learned to interface directly with Velnari quantum networks, giving human forces unprecedented coordination abilities. But the most important development was the friendship that grew between the two species. Human children sent drawings and messages to Velnari refugees, while Velnari artists created crystalline sculptures depicting human acts of courage and kindness. The bonds being formed went far beyond military alliance. Velnari Elder Azeth, who had sacrificed much of her life force to help humanity understand the quantum consciousness process, spent her final days working with human scientists. Her last contribution was a complete map of hegemony fleet positions and movement patterns, gathered through the Velnari quantum network. "Your species puzzles us," Azeth told Morrison before she died. "No one has ever risked themselves for strangers the way humans do. The hegemony believes all species act only from self-interest. They will not understand your motivations until it is too late." Intelligence reports confirmed that hegemony forces were gathering for a massive assault. War Prince Skelth, the Coalition's most experienced military commander, was assembling a fleet that included ships from all 12 member species. Their plan was simple: overwhelm human defenses through superior numbers, destroy Earth's industrial capacity, and eliminate the Velnari refugees in a single devastating campaign. Admiral Morrison called his final staff meeting aboard the Defiance as they prepared to deploy to Velnari space. The assembled officers represented the best of humanity's military forces, but they all knew they were facing impossible odds. "Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison began. In approximately 6 hours, we will jump to the Kepler 442 system to begin. Our defense of the Velnari refugee sites, intelligence estimates suggest we will be outnumbered approximately 17-1. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell stood up. Sir, what are our objectives if we can't win a conventional engagement? Morrison looked around the room at faces that showed determination rather than fear. Our objective is to make the hegemony pay such a high price for their genocide that other species will see resistance is possible. If we can destroy enough of their ships, hurt them badly enough, maybe others will find the courage to stand up. Chief Engineer Davis asked the question everyone was thinking. What if we lose, Admiral? Morrison was quiet for a moment before answering. Then we lose fighting for something worth dying for. The Velnari will know they weren't forgotten. The galaxy will know that at least one species chose to do what was right instead of what was safe. As the fleet prepared for their final jump to Velnari space, messages poured in from Earth. Families saying goodbye to loved ones, children promising to remember the heroes who fought for strangers, and world leaders reaffirming their commitment to the cause. President Warren's final message was broadcast to every ship in the fleet. You carry with you not just the hopes of humanity, but the hopes of every oppressed species in the galaxy. Show them War Prince Skelth stood on the command deck of the massive dreadnought Domination Eternal, watching his fleet emerge from hyperspace around the Kepler 442 system. 837 vessels of the Hegemony Coalition spread out in perfect formation, their combined firepower capable of reducing planets to molten slag. The War Prince was a veteran of 43 extermination campaigns. He had overseen the elimination of 6 different species that had proven inconvenient to hegemony rule. The humans would be no different from the others, a brief period of futile resistance followed by complete destruction. Tactical report, Skelth commanded in the harsh Crethan language. His intelligence officer, a 4-armed Zelnari named Klix, consulted the sensor displays. Human forces detected at 3 separate locations. 47 vessels total, sir. They appear to be defending the Velnari refugee sites as predicted. Skelth's scaled lips pulled back in what his species considered a smile. 47 ships against our fleet. These mammals are even more foolish than I anticipated. Send the standard surrender demand. The message was broadcast on all frequencies, toward the human fleet. Skelth had delivered the same ultimatum dozens of times before. Surrender unconditionally, abandon the Velnari to their fate, and humanity would be allowed to continue existing as a junior member of the coalition. Refuse and face complete annihilation. Admiral Morrison received the transmission aboard the UES Defiance. His small fleet was spread across defensive positions around 3 different worlds, where Velnari refugees had built hidden cities. The odds were even worse than intelligence had predicted, nearly 18-1 against humanity. Lieutenant Commander Alex Thompson reported from the sensor station. Admiral, hegemony forces are deploying into standard siege formation. 12 massive platforms carrying planet-killer weapons, supported by heavy cruisers and destroyer squadrons. Morrison looked at the tactical display showing the enormous enemy fleet. His own forces looked pitifully small in comparison. The carrier UES Defiance with its escort vessels protecting the primary refugee site, while smaller battle groups defended the other 2 locations. Open a channel to all ships, Morrison ordered. Communications. Officer Danny Clark nodded. Channel open, sir. Morrison's voice carried to every human vessel in the system. All units, this is Admiral Morrison. The enemy has offered us terms. We can surrender, abandon the Velnari to extinction, and hope the hegemony keeps their word about letting humanity survive. I'm sure you can all guess my response to that offer. Across the fleet, human crews prepared for what they knew would be the fight of their lives. Marine Sergeant Tony Rodriguez and his boarding teams checked their equipment one final time. Fighter pilot Lieutenant Danny Clark ran through his pre-flight checklist aboard one of the Defiance's small attack craft. Army medic Captain Rachel Green set up emergency medical stations throughout the ship. The battle began exactly as War Prince Skelth expected. The hegemony fleet advanced in overwhelming formation, preparing to demonstrate their superior firepower. But the human response was unlike anything in Skelth's extensive military experience. Instead of meeting the attack head-on, the human ships simply vanished. Lieutenant Nancy Price, linked to the Velnari Quantum Consciousness Network, guided the entire fleet through impossible hyperspace jumps. Ships appeared and disappeared across the battlefield, striking targets that should have been impossible to reach, then vanishing before the hegemony could respond. The UES Liberty, commanded by Captain Emma Foster, materialized inside the formation of heavy cruisers protecting Skelth's flagship. Before the enemy could react, Foster's ship launched every missile it carried at point-blank range, crippling two massive vessels before jumping away. Skelth watched in growing alarm as his perfectly organized fleet descended into chaos. Human ships appeared randomly throughout his formation, struck hard, and disappeared before his gunners could target them. In the first 10 minutes of combat, he lost more vessels than in some entire campaigns. "How are they doing this?" he demanded of his science officer. The hegemony had never encountered quantum navigation technology before. Their own hyperspace systems required careful calculation and preparation, making precise tactical jumps impossible. But the humans were treating hyperspace like an extension of normal space, moving through dimensions the Coalition didn't even know existed. Lieutenant Danny Clark led his fighter squadron in the war's first quantum jump assault. Using Velnari guidance, his 12 small craft appeared directly inside the hangar bay of a hegemony carrier. The alien crew was so shocked by the impossible maneuver that Clark's pilots destroyed half the enemy's fighter complement before they could launch. But the human advantage in mobility couldn't overcome the massive numerical disparity forever. War Prince Skelth adapted his tactics, ordering his ships to form tighter formations and focus fire on human vessels the moment they appeared. The strategy began to work. Human ships started taking serious damage, and several were destroyed. Outright, Marine Sergeant Rodriguez led the most audacious assault of the battle. Using quantum jumps to board the hegemony command cruiser Inevitable Victory, his Marines fought deck by deck through corridors designed for alien physiology. The hand-to-hand combat was brutal, but human close-quarters training proved superior to anything the Coalition had encountered. "These mammals fight like rabid animals," one Crethan officer reported to Skelth. "They don't retreat even when facing impossible odds." The turning point came when crystalline singer Venth made the ultimate sacrifice. The Velnari Elder had been coordinating quantum navigation for the entire human fleet, but the strain was slowly killing her. Against all protests from human commanders, she prepared to channel the collective consciousness of her entire species into one massive space-time disruption. Admiral Morrison felt Venth's presence in his mind as she prepared for her final act. "Admiral Morrison of the humans," her voice echoed through quantum dimensions. "My people and I thank you for showing us that courage still exists in the galaxy. Use what we give you wisely." The effect was unlike anything ever seen in recorded galactic history. Venth linked her consciousness with Lieutenant Price and every other human navigator simultaneously, creating a quantum cascade that rippled through normal space-time. Half of the hegemony fleet found themselves trapped in localized time distortions, their ships moving in slow motion while human vessels attacked at normal speed. War Prince Skelth watched in horror as his overwhelming numerical advantage evaporated. The humans were systematically destroying ships that couldn't fight back, turning the tide of battle through technology the Coalition didn't understand. Worse, his own crew was beginning to show signs of fear, an emotion hegemony forces rarely experienced. The cost of Venth's sacrifice was enormous. The Velnari Elder died from quantum consciousness overload, her final act saving both her people and their human protectors. But her death galvanized every human in the fleet. They had been fighting for strangers who became friends. Now they were fighting to honor a hero's sacrifice. Captain Emma Foster, commanding the destroyer UES Justice, led a direct assault on War Prince Skelth's flagship. Her ship took massive damage from the dreadnought's defensive weapons, but she managed to cripple its main engines before her vessel was destroyed. Foster and her entire crew died in the explosion, but their sacrifice left the enemy commander's ship vulnerable. The final phase of the battle was pure chaos. Human ships, guided by the quantum network Venth had died to maintain, struck at targets throughout the hegemony formation. Marine boarding parties captured several enemy vessels intact, while fighter squadrons destroyed ships 10 times their size through precision strikes at critical systems. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell coordinated marine operations across multiple ships simultaneously. Her forces had learned to use quantum jumps for tactical advantage, appearing in enemy corridors, completing their missions, and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. The psychological effect on hegemony troops was devastating. War Prince. Skelth found himself in an impossible situation. He had lost over 300 ships to a force that should have been annihilated in the first hour of combat. His remaining vessels were scattered and demoralized, while the humans seemed to grow more determined with every casualty they suffered. The final straw came when Lieutenant Danny Clark's fighter squadron quantum jumped directly into the bridge of the siege platform Absolute Authority. The massive ship's command crew was killed before they could react, and Clark's pilots managed to destroy the vessel's primary weapon systems from the inside. Skelth made the decision that would echo across the galaxy for generations. For the first time in hegemony history, a coalition fleet withdrew from combat against a numerically inferior force. The War Prince ordered his remaining ships to retreat to hyperspace, abandoning the field to the humans and their Velnari allies. As the hegemony fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Admiral Morrison surveyed the aftermath of the most unlikely victory in galactic history. Humanity had lost 26 ships and over 3,000 personnel, including heroes like Captain Foster and Crystalline Singer Venth. But they had achieved something no one thought possible. They had defeated the hegemony. Inope. News of humanity's victory over War Prince Skelth's fleet spread across the galaxy faster than anyone had expected. Within weeks, species that had remained silent under hegemony oppression for centuries began sending secret messages to Earth. The impossible had happened. Someone had faced the coalition's military might and won. Dr. Lisa Parker, now serving as Director of Interspecies Relations, established the Freedom Coalition headquarters in a series of underground facilities on Luna. The location was chosen for security reasons, but also because the moon's low gravity made it easier for different alien species to interact comfortably. The first species to make official contact were the Kithari, aquatic beings who had been enslaved by the hegemony for over 200 years. Their representative, Flo Singer Denth, arrived at Luna Station in a specially designed water-filled transport that looked more like a living creature than a spacecraft. For generations, we have served the coalition as navigators and engineers. Denth explained through a translation device that converted the Kithari's sonar-based language into human speech. We never believed freedom was possible until we heard of your victory at Kepler 442. The Kithari brought with them detailed intelligence about hegemony fleet movements and industrial facilities. Their forced service in coalition shipyards had given them access to technical specifications for every major vessel class. More importantly, they revealed that dozens of other species were considering rebellion if they could be assured of support. Captain Jake Morrison, who had been promoted to admiral after the battle, found himself coordinating with representatives from 17 different species within the first month after Skelth's defeat. Each group brought unique abilities and perspectives, but all shared the same desperate hope for freedom from hegemony rule. The Orin were nomadic traders who had maintained their independence by constantly moving between star systems. Their ships were fast and virtually undetectable, making them perfect for carrying messages between rebel groups. Commander Zeph of the trading vessel Wandering Star became humanity's primary intelligence coordinator. The hegemony controls through fear, Zeph explained during a strategy meeting with human commanders. For centuries, no one has dared to resist because everyone believed resistance was suicide. Your victory changed that calculation, but the Coalition's response to the growing rebellion was predictably violent. They launched retaliatory strikes against any species suspected of supporting the Freedom Coalition. Entire colonies were destroyed. As examples to others who might consider following humanity's lead, General Marcus Steele watched the intelligence reports with growing anger. They're not just fighting us anymore. They're terrorizing anyone who might support us. We need to expand our operations to protect these potential allies. The solution came from an unexpected source. Harmonic Keeper Venth, the Velnari elder who had replaced the heroic crystalline singer Venth, offered to create quantum communication networks that would allow instant coordination across multiple star systems. The technology would enable the Freedom Coalition to respond to hegemony attacks faster than ever before. We cannot bring back those who died for our freedom, Venth explained to Admiral Morrison. But we can ensure their sacrifice serves a greater purpose. The quantum network will connect every free species in the galaxy. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell was placed in command of the newly formed Galactic Liberation Corps, a joint military force that included volunteers from over 30 different species. The diversity created unique challenges. Beings with radically different physiologies, breathing requirements, and combat doctrines had to learn to fight as a unified force. Marine Sergeant Tony Rodriguez found himself training soldiers who ranged from crystalline Velnari to gaseous HFY, who existed as intelligent clouds. The hardest part isn't the physical differences, he explained to his human staff. It's convincing everyone that we can actually win this war. The training programs Rodriguez developed became legendary throughout the Coalition. Human military doctrine emphasized adaptability, initiative, and never giving up regardless of the odds. These concepts were revolutionary to species that had been conditioned to accept defeat for generations. The Freedom Coalition's first major victory after Kepler 442 came when they liberated the Kithari homeworld of Aquatica. Admiral Morrison led a joint fleet of 47 human vessels and 63 ships from allied species in a coordinated assault on the planet's hegemony garrison. The battle demonstrated how much the rebellion had grown. Kithari engineers had sabotaged the orbital defense platforms from within, while Oran traders provided real-time intelligence on enemy fleet positions. Human Marines worked alongside Velnari quantum warriors and HFY infiltration specialists to capture key installations. War Prince Skelth, still smarting from his defeat at Kepler 442, personally led the hegemony counterattack. But he found himself facing not just humans, but a coordinated alliance of species working together with unprecedented efficiency. "This is impossible," Skelth told his staff as they watched coalition forces coordinate attacks across multiple dimensions simultaneously. "These species have been enemies for millennia. They should be fighting each other, not us." But the hegemony had never understood what humanity brought to galactic politics. Humans had a unique talent for seeing past species differences to find common ground. Where the coalition imposed unity through fear, the Freedom Alliance built cooperation through shared purpose. Lieutenant Danny Clark, now commanding a mixed squadron of human fighters and Velnari quantum ships, led the decisive assault on Skelth's flagship. The combined force used quantum jumping and conventional tactics simultaneously, creating a battle pattern the hegemony had no defense against. The liberation of Aquatica sent shockwaves throughout hegemony space. Enslaved species across the galaxy began uprising, knowing they now had powerful allies who would support their fight for freedom. The coalition found itself fighting brushfires on dozens of worlds simultaneously. President Elizabeth Warren addressed the United Galactic Assembly, a new organization formed to coordinate the growing rebellion. Representatives from over 60 species gathered at Luna Station to hear humanity's vision for a free galaxy. Every species has the right to exist, to grow, to reach for the stars, Warren declared. No coalition of tyrants will ever again hunt. Innocence while free beings draw breath. We stand together, or we fall alone. But we will never again let genocide masquerade as order. The formation of the United Galactic Assembly marked a turning point in the war. What had begun as humanity's desperate attempt to save the Velnari had grown into a galaxy-wide movement for freedom and self-determination. Dr. Kevin Wright, now serving as the Assembly's cultural liaison, worked to establish common principles that could unite species with vastly different biologies and belief systems. The Universal Declaration of Sapient Rights became the founding document of the new galactic order. Admiral Morrison found himself commanding a fleet that had grown to over 300 vessels representing 42 different species. The diversity was staggering. Ships that moved through water, others that existed partially in quantum dimensions, and some that used technologies humans were still trying to understand. The hegemony's response was to escalate the conflict. They began using planet-killer weapons against worlds that supported the rebellion, hoping to terrorize other species back into submission. But the strategy backfired. Each atrocity only strengthened the resolve of the Freedom Coalition. Chief Engineer Ryan Davis worked with alien scientists to develop new technologies that combined the best innovations from dozens of species. Human adaptability merged with Velnari quantum consciousness, Kithari engineering, and Orin stealth capabilities to create weapons and defenses the hegemony couldn't counter. The war's character changed fundamentally as the rebellion grew. Instead of defending isolated refugee sites, the Freedom Coalition began liberating entire sectors of space. Each victory brought new allies and resources, creating a snowball effect that the hegemony seemed unable to stop. Crystalline Singer Azeth's sacrifice at Kepler 442 had become a rallying cry for oppressed species throughout the galaxy. Statues of the Velnari Elder appeared on liberated worlds, alongside monuments to human heroes like Captain Emma Foster and the thousands of other beings who had died for freedom. 5 years after the first battle at Kepler 442, Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship looking out at a fleet that represented the dreams of billions of sentient beings. The Freedom Coalition now controlled over 40% of known space, and the hegemony's grip on the galaxy was weakening with each passing day. Lieutenant Nancy Price, still serving as the fleet's primary quantum navigator, reported from her station. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender offers from 3 more hegemony sectors. The Zelnari Collective wants to negotiate a separate peace." Morrison smiled at the irony. The coalition that had once seemed so powerful was fragmenting as member species realized they could no longer maintain their empire through fear alone. Some were switching sides, others were attempting neutrality, and a few were fighting to the bitter end. The Velnari had rebuilt their population to over 50,000, with new